My beloved child. Before this moment fades, there is something your heart has been trying to tell you, and it has been speaking far longer than your mind has been willing to listen. Imagine standing on a quiet shoreline just before sunrise. The tide is pulling away, carrying footprints back into the sea before anyone notices they were ever there. Sometimes love feels exactly like that. It does not disappear all at once. It leaves one silent wave at a time. And somewhere, beyond everything you can currently see, a soul who once believed there would always be another tomorrow is wondering whether this is the moment to finally let go. Not because love has died, but because hope has grown tired. There is a difference. Many people mistake silence for the end of a story. Yet silence often hides the loudest conversations. While you questioned why nothing seemed to move, someone else was questioning whether they still had permission to believe in what they once felt. Their days continued. Their responsibilities filled every hour. They smiled when others expected them to smile. Yet beneath those ordinary moments lived an unfinished sentence that always seemed to end with your name, even when no one else could hear it. What makes this moment so delicate is not what has already happened. It is what almost happens next. There comes a season when the human heart protects itself by pretending it no longer expects miracles. It begins to convince itself that unanswered prayers should simply become forgotten dreams. Little by little, it builds quiet walls, not because it wants to keep love out, but because disappointment has become too familiar to welcome anything new. Perhaps you know that feeling. Perhaps you have built walls without realizing it. Perhaps they have as well. Yet there is something neither of you expected. Sometimes two people can walk in opposite directions while carrying the exact same longing. One waits for a sign. The other waits for permission. And because both remain silent, each believes the other has already moved on. How strange it is that hearts can stand so close to one another, while feeling separated by an entire lifetime. If you could see beyond ordinary moments, you might notice tiny reminders appearing where no one else pays attention. A familiar song arriving at exactly the right time. A memory returning without invitation. A peaceful feeling interrupting an ordinary afternoon. These moments do not force answers. They simply whisper that life still contains mysteries greater than coincidence. Not every whisper demands action. Some simply invite reflection. Because the greatest conversations rarely begin with words. They begin with awareness. Think about the gardens that bloom after a season that looked completely barren. Anyone passing by during winter would have believed nothing remained alive beneath the frozen ground. Yet hidden roots continued their quiet work where no eye could witness them. Love can resemble that hidden season. Growth often happens in places where appearances insist that nothing is changing. Still, even hidden roots cannot wait forever. Every season eventually asks a question. Will you bloom? Or will you remain buried because fear feels safer than possibility? That question is gently approaching two hearts at the same time. Neither fully realizes it yet. One is becoming weary of carrying feelings that seem to echo into empty space. The other is beginning to notice that what they tried to forget has quietly become impossible to replace. Neither journey is simple. Neither person is perfect. Yet sometimes healing begins the instant someone stops believing that every closed door must remain closed forever. There is wisdom in patience. But there is also wisdom in recognizing when hope deserves another chance to breathe. The hardest goodbyes are not always spoken aloud. Some exist only inside the heart. They happen when someone quietly decides to stop expecting happiness because expecting it has become too painful. From the outside, nothing appears different. Inside, however, an entire future begins folding itself away like letters placed back into a drawer. That is why compassion matters more than certainty. Because we rarely know which invisible battle another soul is fighting. Even those who appear strongest sometimes carry the deepest questions in complete silence. And tonight, Someone is standing at one of those invisible crossroads. Not with anger. Not with resentment. Simply with exhaustion. They are wondering whether releasing a dream would finally bring peace, or whether walking away would leave an emptiness that follows them much farther than they imagined. What they cannot yet see is that one quiet realization is already moving toward them. It is small enough to overlook. Gentle enough to dismiss. Yet powerful enough to change the direction of everything that follows. And before either heart understands what that realization truly means, another unexpected truth is about to surface, one neither of you has been prepared to face. There is a moment that almost no one recognizes while it is happening. It does not arrive with thunder. It does not announce itself with certainty. Instead, it slips quietly into an ordinary day, hidden inside a memory that refuses to stay buried. That is where this chapter begins. The one who has been convincing themselves that goodbye is the safest choice suddenly pauses. Not because someone stopped them, but because something within them did. A single thought. One unexpected memory. One question they can no longer silence. What if I have misunderstood everything? That question is gentle, yet it carries extraordinary weight. For so long, they believed the distance between you was proof that the story had already ended. Every unanswered moment became another reason to lower their expectations. Every quiet day felt like another page closing. But hearts rarely heal in straight lines. Sometimes they circle back to the very place they were determined to leave behind. That is exactly what begins to happen. Without warning, they remember a version of themselves they almost forgot. The version that laughed more freely. The version that believed impossible things could still happen. The version that did not measure love by fear. It surprises them. Because they thought they had outgrown those feelings. Instead, they discover those feelings quietly survived everything. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Patiently. Like the last candle still burning after everyone assumed the room had gone dark. And suddenly, their goodbye no longer feels as certain as it did yesterday. Yet another mystery appears. If hope still exists, why has neither heart found the courage to acknowledge it? This question lingers through every ordinary moment. While others continue living their routines, an invisible conversation unfolds beneath the surface. Every familiar place reminds them of unfinished possibilities. Every peaceful evening carries a strange sense that something remains unsaid. Even silence begins sounding different. Not empty. Expectant. Life has an unusual way of revealing what matters most only after we become convinced we can live without it. That realization is rarely comfortable. It asks people to examine the walls they carefully built. Not every wall was created from pride. Some were built from disappointment. Others from misunderstanding. Some simply grew one quiet brick at a time until neither person remembered where the first one began. The remarkable thing is this. Walls may hide a horizon. They can never erase it. Beyond every barrier still waits the possibility of another sunrise. The question is no longer whether light exists. The question is whether either heart will believe it enough to keep walking. As these thoughts deepen, another unexpected change quietly begins. The fear of rejection slowly loses its voice. Not all at once. Only for brief moments. Small windows of courage begin opening where fear once lived alone. It feels unfamiliar. Almost unsettling. Because hope always carries risk. To hope is to admit something still matters. To care is to become vulnerable again. Many people avoid that feeling for years. Yet something within them has grown tired of pretending indifference. They no longer wish to win the argument against their own heart. They simply want peace. But peace is often misunderstood. It is not found by burying love. It is found by facing it honestly. Even when the outcome remains unknown. Perhaps this is why certain moments arrive without explanation. A familiar face appearing in a dream. An old conversation returning with unexpected clarity. A calm feeling settling into an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Whether these moments come from memory, reflection, or the quiet work of the heart itself, they remind us that some emotions deserve attention rather than avoidance. And while all of this unfolds, another truth remains hidden. There is something neither of you has fully realized. Both of you have been asking different questions, while searching for the very same answer. One has wondered, have they forgotten me? The other has quietly asked, would my presence still matter? Different words. The same longing. If only hearts could hear each other before fear translated every silence into rejection. But perhaps timing has been preparing something neither person could have forced. Growth often happens before understanding arrives. The seed never sees the flower while it is still beneath the soil. Yet every unseen day is shaping what will eventually bloom. Tonight feels like one of those unseen days. Nothing appears dramatic. No grand announcement fills the sky. Yet beneath the surface, old assumptions are beginning to crack. And once a single crack appears, light has an extraordinary way of finding its way through. Still, there is one memory they have not allowed themselves to revisit. Not because it was painful. Because it was too meaningful. The instant they finally allow themselves to look at it again, everything they believed about saying goodbye may begin to change in ways neither heart could have imagined. There is a reason that memory has remained untouched for so long. Not because time erased it, but because the heart protects what it cannot bear to lose. The moment they finally stop running from it, everything around them seems strangely still. The noise of everyday life fades into the background. The endless distractions no longer hold their attention. It is as though one quiet memory has stepped forward and gently asked to be seen exactly as it was, not through fear, not through regret, but through truth. And truth has a remarkable way of changing what once seemed final. They remember a conversation that appeared ordinary at the time. A smile that lasted only a few seconds. A look that lingered just a little longer than either of you admitted. The kind of moment most people would overlook. Yet now, viewed through a different heart, it carries an entirely different meaning. What if the things that felt insignificant were never insignificant at all? What if the smallest moments were the ones that revealed the deepest affection? That realization settles slowly. Like morning light filling a room before anyone notices the darkness has disappeared. For the first time in a long while, they stop asking whether love was enough. Instead, they begin asking whether fear was simply louder. There is a difference. Love builds quietly. Fear speaks urgently. When both exist together, fear often sounds more convincing. But only for a season. Because eventually, love grows tired of whispering from behind locked doors. It begins knocking. Not with force. With patience. And every gentle knock asks the same question. Will you finally let yourself believe what your heart has known all along? That question follows them into moments they cannot explain. While driving. While walking. While sitting alone after the day has ended. Even laughter with other people cannot completely silence it. It keeps returning. Not demanding an answer. Only inviting honesty. Meanwhile, something else begins unfolding, something neither of you expected. The picture they created of you inside their mind starts to change. Not because you became someone different, but because they finally stop seeing you through the lens of old fears. The misunderstandings that once appeared enormous begin shrinking. The distance that felt impossible suddenly seems bridgeable. What once looked like the ending starts resembling an unfinished chapter. Hope rarely arrives as a dramatic miracle. More often, it arrives as a quiet shift in perspective. A single thought that says, "Perhaps I gave up too soon." Those 5 words are heavier than they appear. They carry humility. They carry courage. Most of all, they carry possibility. Yet possibility always asks for something in return. It asks both hearts to release the stories they have been telling themselves. The story that silence always means rejection. The story that waiting always means forgetting. The story that if something is meant to be, no effort is ever required. Life is rarely that simple. Some of the most meaningful relationships are not separated by a lack of love. They are separated by assumptions that neither person ever questioned. Assumptions become invisible chains. The longer they remain unchallenged, the heavier they become. But chains lose their strength the moment someone realizes they were never locked as tightly as they believed. That realization is beginning to unfold. Slowly. Quietly. Almost unnoticed. And yet its impact could echo far beyond this moment. Because somewhere within their heart, a sentence has begun repeating itself. If I leave now, will I spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had stayed? Not everyone is brave enough to ask that question. Fewer are brave enough to answer it honestly. Tonight. They cannot escape it. The idea of saying goodbye no longer brings relief. It brings uncertainty. And uncertainty has opened a door that certainty had already tried to close. Still, there is another layer to this story that has not yet been revealed. There is someone else who has quietly influenced this journey without even realizing it. Not by giving advice. Not by making decisions. Simply by speaking a few unexpected words that continue echoing in their thoughts. Those words seemed ordinary when they were spoken. Now they feel impossible to ignore. They have become the final thread holding the entire story together. And once that thread is gently pulled, a hidden truth that has remained concealed from both hearts will finally come into the light, just when everything seemed ready to fade away. The words were spoken on a day that seemed completely ordinary. No dramatic music. No life-changing announcement. Just a quiet conversation that almost disappeared into the background of everything else. Yet some sentences arrived disguised as ordinary moments because the heart would not be ready for them any other way. The person who spoke them had no idea they were touching a wound that had remained hidden for a long time. They simply looked at the one who had been preparing to walk away and said, "You still talk about them like someone who matters." That was all. One sentence. But it landed with the weight of truth. Because the heart recognizes honesty before the mind has time to argue with it. For a moment, they tried to dismiss it. They laughed softly. They changed the subject. They pretended the words meant nothing. Yet later, when the room grew quiet and the distractions finally faded, that sentence returned. Not loudly. Gently. Persistently. "You still talk about them like someone who matters." And suddenly they realized something they had been avoiding for months. People do not speak with tenderness about what has become meaningless. They do not protect the memory of someone they have truly forgotten. They do not carry invisible conversations with a name that no longer matters to them. The truth had been present all along. They had simply been afraid to look directly at it. Fear can be strangely convincing. It can make distance seem permanent. It can make silence sound like rejection. It can make two people who care deeply for one another behave as though they have already become strangers. But fear has one weakness. It cannot survive forever in the presence of honesty. And honesty is finally beginning to rise. Not as a sudden declaration. As a series of quiet realizations. They realize they still notice reminders of you without trying. They realize certain songs still pause their thoughts. They realize your happiness still matters to them in a way they cannot easily explain. Most surprising of all, they realize the idea of never speaking to you again feels heavier than the risk of being vulnerable one more time. That discovery changes the atmosphere around everything. The goodbye that once felt inevitable now feels unfinished. The distance that seemed impossible now contains a small opening where hope can breathe again. And in that opening, something unexpected begins to grow. Courage. Not the loud kind that demands attention. The quiet kind that appears when a person decides the truth matters more than pride. Meanwhile, your own heart has been changing in ways you may not have fully noticed. The pain that once felt sharp has become reflective. The questions that once kept you awake now carry a different tone. Instead of asking why everything fell apart, part of you has begun wondering whether every delay was preparing both hearts for a conversation neither was ready to have before. That possibility is difficult to ignore. Because timing is not always punishment. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes two people must grow separately before they can recognize each other clearly. Sometimes the space between them becomes the very place where understanding is born. And yet, even now, nothing has been forced. The future remains unwritten. That is what makes this moment so powerful. Love is not standing at a locked door anymore. It is standing at a threshold, waiting to see whether either heart will take the next honest step. Not a perfect step. Not a fearless step. Simply an honest one. There is a scene unfolding tonight that neither of you can fully see. While one heart wrestles with the possibility of staying, the other is quietly beginning to believe that all endings are not permanent. The distance between those realizations is smaller than either of you imagines. And then something happens. Small. Unexpected. Impossible to plan. A message appears. A name is seen again. A memory returns with unusual clarity. Whatever form it takes, it arrives at exactly the moment when giving up would have been easiest. The one who was ready to say goodbye stops completely. Their hand pauses. Their thoughts change direction. The certainty they carried for so long suddenly feels fragile, as though one quiet thread has come loose and the entire story is beginning to unravel. For the first time, they allow themselves to imagine a future that does not end in silence. And once that possibility enters the heart, it becomes very difficult to pretend it was never there. But there is still one truth neither of you has spoken aloud. One truth that has been waiting beneath every memory, every hesitation, every unanswered question. The moment that truth is finally acknowledged, nothing will return to the way it was before. And that moment is closer than either of you realizes. The truth has never been hidden because it was too complicated. It remained hidden because it was too vulnerable. There is a quiet difference between protecting your heart and never allowing it to speak. For a long time, both of you believed silence was the safer path. It avoided awkward conversations. It prevented disappointment. It offered the illusion of control. But silence has a cost. It slowly convinces people that what remains unspoken no longer exists. And that has never been true. The feeling survived. It simply learned to live in quieter places. It lingered in unexpected smiles. It returned during peaceful evenings. It appeared in moments when the world became still enough for honesty to be heard. Now, that honesty is asking to step into the light. Not all at once. One breath at a time. One realization at a time. The person who once believed goodbye would finally bring peace begins to notice something they cannot explain. Every time they imagine a future without you, it feels strangely incomplete. Not empty. Incomplete. As though an important page has been removed from a favorite book. The story still exists. But something essential is missing. That realization follows them wherever they go. They try to focus on tomorrow. Yet yesterday keeps gently reminding them that not everything unfinished was meant to be abandoned. Sometimes unfinished simply means not yet. There is wisdom in those two words. Not yet. They leave room for growth. They leave room for healing. Most importantly, they leave room for grace. Because grace often arrives where certainty ends. It whispers that people can mature. Misunderstandings can soften. Old fears can lose their power. The heart can become brave in ways it never imagined. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all. Love does not always return wearing the same face it once had. Sometimes it returns calmer. Wiser. More patient. Less concerned with proving itself. More willing to listen. That is the kind of change quietly taking place. Not a dramatic transformation. A meaningful one. The one who was preparing to close the door forever now finds themselves standing in the doorway instead. Looking back. Not with regret. With curiosity. They begin asking questions they once refused to ask. What if I misunderstood their silence? What if they were carrying fears I never saw? What if we were both protecting the very thing we hoped would survive? Those questions do not provide immediate answers. But they do something equally important. They reopen the heart. And once a heart begins reopening, light enters places that fear kept hidden. Perhaps you have noticed something changing within yourself as well. The need to understand every detail has become quieter. The desire for peace has become stronger. You are beginning to recognize that some chapters cannot be forced into existence. They unfold when both hearts become ready to read the same page. That readiness cannot be rushed. Yet neither can it be ignored forever. Because every meaningful journey eventually reaches a moment of decision. Not a decision fueled by pressure. A decision born from clarity. That moment is drawing near. Not because destiny demands it, but because both hearts have been slowly transformed by everything they have experienced apart. Distance has taught compassion. Waiting has taught patience. Silence has taught the value of honest words. Even the uncertainty has carried its own quiet lesson. Nothing has been wasted. Every tear. Every unanswered question. Every lonely evening. Each one has shaped a heart capable of loving more deeply than before. And then, something unexpected shifts. The weight of fear no longer feels heavier than the possibility of hope. It is a small change. Almost impossible to measure. Yet it changes everything. Because courage is rarely the absence of fear. It is the quiet decision that something else matters more. The one who almost walked away begins to understand that saying goodbye would not free them from wondering. It would only leave the question unfinished. And some questions echo for years when they are never given the chance to be answered. Tonight, that echo is becoming impossible to ignore. The heart that was preparing to close the final chapter has gently placed the book back on the table. Not to relive the past, but to discover whether another chapter still waits beyond the page where the story seemed to end. Yet before a single new word can be written, one final piece of the puzzle must be revealed. It is the one truth that neither heart has dared to confess, even to itself. When that truth finally finds its voice, the meaning of every silence, every delay, and every almost goodbye will become clearer than either of you ever imagined. And that revelation begins, with one simple, unexpected choice. The unexpected choice is not dramatic. No crowds gather. No extraordinary sign appears across the sky. It begins in the quiet place where every meaningful change has always begun. Within the heart. The one who had nearly convinced themselves to let go awakens with an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, they stop rehearsing reasons to walk away. Instead, they become curious about what might happen if they stopped letting fear write the ending. That single shift changes everything. Not because it guarantees an outcome, but because it opens a door that had been locked from the inside. There is remarkable strength in an open heart. Not because it never hurts. Because it chooses honesty even when certainty is impossible. That is the choice now resting before them. Not whether every question has been answered. Not whether every wound has disappeared. Simply whether love deserves one final opportunity to speak before silence becomes permanent. They close their eyes for a moment. Faces come and go through their thoughts. Conversations drift by like distant echoes. Then one memory remains. Yours. Not the version shaped by misunderstanding. Not the version colored by distance. The truest version. The one that always made them feel seen in ways they never found the words to describe. And in that quiet reflection, another realization gently settles over them. Some people enter our lives to teach us lessons. Others leave us with memories. But every so often, someone arrives whose presence quietly changes the way we see ourselves. Those connections are not easily forgotten. Even when life pulls people in different directions. Even when seasons change. Even when silence lasts longer than expected. That is why this story has never truly been about saying goodbye. It has been about discovering whether fear would have the final word. Or whether compassion would. The answer has been growing all along. Like dawn slowly replacing the night. No single ray of sunlight announces the morning. Yet suddenly, the whole horizon is bright. That is what hope often feels like. It does not erase yesterday. It transforms the way tomorrow is approached. As this quiet dawn unfolds within them, they begin releasing the weight they have carried for so long. The need to be right. The need to protect every fragile emotion. The need to assume the worst before life has spoken its final sentence. Those burdens fall away one by one. In their place comes something far lighter. Understanding. They begin to see that two imperfect hearts can spend far too much time waiting for the other to make the first move, while both are secretly hoping for the very same thing. What a gentle reminder that pride often speaks loudly, while love waits patiently. And patient love has remarkable endurance. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden inside this entire journey. Not that every story unfolds exactly as we imagine. But that hearts become stronger when they choose grace over assumptions. Forgiveness over resentment. Hope over despair. Even when the road ahead remains unwritten. Because the unwritten pages are not empty. They are full of possibility. If this story has stirred something within you, let it simply be an invitation to reflect on the relationships that have shaped your own heart. Sometimes the most meaningful step is not finding every answer, it is allowing compassion, honesty, and hope to guide whatever comes next. The one who almost whispered a final goodbye now understands something they never expected. The chapter was never asking to be erased. It was asking to be understood. And understanding has changed everything. As one season quietly comes to a close, another begins to unfold, not with certainty, but with renewed courage, deeper wisdom, and a heart that is finally willing to believe that some stories deserve to be explored a little further. What awaits beyond that next page is a journey neither heart could have imagined when this story first began. The next page does not begin with certainty. It begins with a quiet breath. After everything that has unfolded, neither heart is rushing anymore. The urgency to force an answer has faded, replaced by something far more powerful, the willingness to understand before being understood. That is where lasting change often begins. Not in perfect timing, but in sincere intention. As the days move forward, ordinary moments begin carrying extraordinary meaning. A familiar place no longer feels like a reminder of loss. Instead, it becomes a reminder of growth. The silence that once felt unbearable now feels less like an empty room and more like the pause between two chapters. There is wisdom in pauses. Music would lose its beauty without them. The changing seasons would lose their wonder without moments of stillness. Even the heart sometimes needs quiet before it can recognize what truly matters. You may not realize it yet, but your own spirit has changed throughout this journey. You have become gentler where you once became defensive. More patient where you once demanded immediate answers. More willing to believe that healing often happens beneath the surface long before anyone can see it. That transformation is its own miracle. Because the greatest victories are rarely visible at first. They begin where no audience is watching. They begin when someone chooses kindness over bitterness. Hope over discouragement. Faith over fear. Meanwhile, the one who nearly walked away has also been changing. Not because someone persuaded them. Because truth has quietly become impossible to ignore. They finally understand that protecting the heart and imprisoning it are not the same thing. For too long, they confused the two. They believed closing every door would keep disappointment outside. Instead, it also kept joy from entering. That realization humbles them. It softens them. And in that softer place, they begin imagining something they once considered impossible. A conversation. Not one meant to erase the past. Not one meant to assign blame. Simply one built upon honesty. Can you imagine how different the world would feel if more hearts sought understanding before judgment? How many endings would become new beginnings? How many misunderstandings would dissolve beneath one genuine moment of listening? Those questions linger like the first stars appearing after sunset. They do not demand immediate answers. They simply remind us that every ending we fear may not be the ending we receive. Then something beautiful happens. Neither heart is chasing certainty anymore. Instead, both are learning to trust the quiet work of healing. There is freedom in that. The future no longer feels like a test to pass. It becomes a path to walk. One step. Then another. Without needing to see the entire road. That is how hope grows. Not in giant leaps. In faithful footsteps. Looking back now, the title of this story carries a different meaning than it did at the beginning. The farewell that once seemed unavoidable was never only about two people drifting apart. It was about saying goodbye to fear. Goodbye to assumptions. Goodbye to the belief that silence always means the story is over. Some goodbyes make room for something better. They clear away what no longer belongs so that truth has space to breathe. And perhaps that has been heaven's quiet invitation all along. Not to cling to anxiety. But to release it. Not to surrender hope. But to let hope mature. Not to demand tomorrow. But to cherish today. So if your heart has walked through this journey from the very first word until now, carry this thought with you. The most meaningful stories are not remembered because every chapter was easy. They are remembered because every chapter changed the people living inside them. And no matter where your own path leads from here, may you never lose the courage to choose compassion over fear, honesty over pride, and hope over despair. Because sometimes, the farewell we feared was only the beginning of becoming the person we were always meant to be. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where today's questions slowly become tomorrow's understanding, a new chapter is already waiting to be written.